And this is Brent League with UT San Antonio. I just want to make sure everybody's aware that we just turned on recording of the session, just so that everybody knows.
Okay.
Thank you, Brent.
So I will wait maybe 2 or 3 more minutes, and we can start at 5 after, and that should give others enough time to connect. So I just want to know, can everyone see my screen? I did a share.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Excellent.
I can see it on my side. Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I will start in about 1 minute. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to talk with you today and to share with you my work that I've been doing with data visualization, and in hopes of giving you some resources to help you to build your own data visualization capacity. So I just want to talk a little bit briefly about what the BPViz webinar series is about. So I've given a number of BPViz workshops and I've listed them here. And as I was thinking about this today, it seems each iteration of this workshop has taken on a different form. And so I'm excited about today and this week to be able to present BPViz, the workshop, in the form of a webinar series. We will be having a multi-day session for this week. In each one of those sessions, we will be talking about different aspects of data visualization. And so in the slides that I've provided on the web page, I've also provided links if anyone is interested in taking a look to see what we've done in the past. And so you can see last year it was about broadening participation, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And today we are going to start out with a more hands-on. What's different about this particular workshop is that it is a hybrid form of the workshop. So I appreciate your patience and your confidence in me to present this information to you in a format that I hope that will be informative and helpful for you as well. So a little bit about me. I am Dr. Vitria Bird. I am an assistant professor at Purdue University, main campus in West Lafayette, Indiana. I'm also the director of the Bird Data Visualization Lab, where we focus on the pedagogy of data visualization. There is a consensus that everyone should have some data visualization skills. However, there's a lack of consensus on how to go about gaining those skills. And so one of the things that I work on is developing pedagogy for teaching data visualization. I'm also interested in high performance computing visualization and utilizing data visualization to advance science in the areas of symptom cluster management for healthcare. And one of the things hopefully you will get out of today's webinar is the different applications of data visualization. I'm sure many of you have your own data that you're looking or expecting to perhaps get some insights this week that will help you to advance your own insight into the data that you're either collecting or you're generating for your own research. So that's a little bit about me. I'd like to acknowledge my co-organizers for the webinar, Ritu Aurora and Brent League. I'd like to thank them both for allowing me this opportunity to, again, present to you and to talk about something that I really like and get kind of carried away with sometimes is data visualization. And so I really welcome this opportunity to virtually meet you all and to engage with you over the next few days. So here is our schedule. So day 0, as I'm calling it, was yesterday. And so some of you indicated that you would like some assistance with downloading and installing the software. That went well yesterday. So I thank you for your efforts to connect with us. There will be, or there is, a feedback survey. And so even if it was just through email, if you could take a moment and give us a little feedback, we'd really appreciate it, because we want to capture all of the interactions so that we can learn from this process and improve it for going forward. So on day 1, which is today, we will begin with an introduction to data visualization. And as you can see on the schedule, I tried to list the skill level. So some of you may consider yourselves beginners or maybe intermediate. So with all things, we have to start at the beginning. So today will be very much the introduction. We're going to cover a lot of items like what is data visualization. And so today we will have a hands-on exercise that I will share with you guys, and time permitting, I will try to do some examples online in real time as you have access to the data as well. Tomorrow, we will have advanced from looking at data to you've got data, now what? So what's our next step? So today we're going to be looking primarily at data. Tomorrow, we will take it to the next step and look at Tableau. And then on the third day, we will look at a different area of data visualization and introduce scientific visualization. And so as we progress forward in each of these days, the skill level will increase. And as you could see, we go from beginner to intermediate and advanced on day 3. On day 4, we have something special for you guys. It is hopeful that you will be able to attend all of the daily webinars. And on the last day, we'll do a visualization hackathon where you can bring your own data and hopefully apply some of the skill sets and the tools that you've acquired over the course of this week to your own data. So I encourage you to attend and to come on each of the days with your questions and comments, and we will try to address them in a speedy manner so that we can keep you moving towards making sense of your own data. Again, if you participated in the download and install session on yesterday, if you will take a moment to complete the short feedback survey, I think it's about 3 questions at the most, and the URL is located here on this slide. You also will have access to the slides as well. So I don't know if you can see this, but I'm getting a tornado warning alert. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes,
Can you see the warning on my screen?
no.
No.
Okay,
No.
so
That's a big thing.
I can see it says alert in big red letters, a tornado warning. So I'm going to proceed for a little bit longer. If it gets really bad, I may have to log off, but we'll proceed for the next few minutes, if it will let me. Okay, so, wow. Okay, so okay, acknowledge. Okay, great. So the URL is there. If you will take a moment to, if you participated in the session yesterday, you can give us some feedback. That would be great. So here's some administrative Administrivia and Logistics tentative schedule. This is what I'm envisioning. Starting tomorrow, we'll have a Q&A session because I will give you some things to work on. We'll start today, and if it spills over, you need more time, you can work on it. And then when we join tomorrow, we will allow the first few minutes for question and answers. I have also created a form where you can actually post your questions, and I do encourage you to do that. Once you post the questions, they are anonymous. I will create a web page for frequently asked questions. So any question that's asked will be answered, and everyone can reap the benefits of what the answers might be. So we will begin with a webinar talk, which I will give. We'll have some hands-on experience or time, and then I may have to log off towards the end, but my colleagues at UTSA will be there to further assist with any questions that you might have. The tools that we will be looking at over the course of this week will be Tableau. So there is a 14-day trial that I encourage you all, if you haven't already downloaded it, to go out and download the trial, take a look at it, look around, see what's out there. We will be using that, or start using it tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, we will do the introduction, or Thursday, we'll do the introduction to ParaView version 5.8. I've also provided the link for that software as well. So we will, because there is so much I want to share with you, but there's just not enough time. So that means you will have some additional resources that I will make available to you. You can read at your leisure. There will be things like tools, maybe some books, and maybe even some websites that I found very insightful and helpful. We will cover a lot of things, but I'm also will not be able to cover everything that you would need in order to do a lot of different things. So we may not get into color and perception. We may not get into proximity of things in terms of how you visualize different types of data. So for those things, the website will be a valuable resource. So I will continue to update the website as we go forward. And if you have some comments or questions, some things that you would like to see that we may not be able to cover during the allotted time, post it in the Q&A form, and I will make sure to update the website to provide you with the information that you've asked for. Okay. So this is what the website looks like if you haven't already visited it, and I've provided the URL to the website. And this website will remain functional and operational throughout the seminar series, and I don't foresee it being removed afterwards, anytime afterwards. So if you want to come back and visit it, you should be able to. So about the webinar series, it's 4 days of visualization content. And if you have ever been to a IEEE conference, I like to say at the end of that conference, you are vizzed out because we cover almost everything you can think about in terms of visualization. We're only going to do a little bit of that this week, just enough to get you interested or get you moving forward, and hopefully enough to pique your interest to want to do more. So to maximize your experience, there will be some exercises for you to complete. They won't be very complicated, just enough to help you to get a feel for the data visualization process. I'll point out some things that hopefully you didn't know, you'll learn, and also some resources that will be useful going forward. Each day or each session is standalone. However, you are encouraged to participate in the entire series. So some of you may have indicated you will only attend for today, or maybe today and Thursday. Either way, whenever you tune in, you should be able to follow along with the content. And I do believe that we are recording this. So if you want to come back and take a look at it, you will have that opportunity as well. As I mentioned before, participants who attend the entire series will be given priority on day 4, which is the visualization, hackathon, and consultation. So kind of a reward for you and your time for participating in the workshop or the series of workshops this week. So, building data visualization capacity. Some of you may have thought, what is data visualization capacity? And if you tried to Google it, you may or may not have found anything. That is one of the things that I am working on. As I mentioned before, I'm interested in the pedagogy of data visualization. And so what I'm interested in is helping you and others to figure out where you are in this data visualization continuum. The fact that you are here today says that you are interested in data visualization. And at some level, you understand the value and the purpose of data visualization. And so what I'm trying to do in the research that I'm doing is to identify those different layers or levels of data visualization capacity. I will be honest, I would love for everyone to become a data visualization scientist, but I know that it's not realistic. So what I want to do is to help you to identify where you are in that continuum, and then you can figure out where you want to go or what additional skills you might need in order to move you forward depending upon your research and professional needs. So at the first stage or the first level is the learner, understanding what you see, building those competencies, and those competencies includes data literacy, data fluency, information literacy, visual literacy. There are others, but this pretty much encompasses what I consider to be at the learner stage or stage 1. Once you have mastered stage 1, or you are at some level of comfort, you then move on to the next stage, which I consider to be the user. So you understand, you have some understanding of the data and what it represents, how to represent it, and how to understand it. The next stage is the user stage, which means you are familiar with, or you become familiar with, visualization principles. What are the techniques that are commonly used in the visualization field? You are familiar with the data visualization process. You are comfortable with choosing the appropriate tool or chart for the data. So each one of these bullet points that I've listed here, we could actually do a whole entire webinar on each one of these separately. But what I want to do is to make you aware of some of the concepts that are present at these different stages. So at the user stage, which by the way, I feel you will be, if you don't feel like you're there now, by the end of this week, you will at least be at the user stage, because we are going to introduce 2 different types of tools, Tableau and ParaView. So that within itself, you will become comfortable, hopefully enough to explore those 2 tools and to do some things beyond this webinar. So you will be at the user stage if you don't feel like you are there now. The next stage is what I call the analyst stage, making sense of the data. So in my mind, you're learning what data is, you are actually creating some visualizations. You can create visualizations and not necessarily have an understanding of what the data represents. And so that's one of the things that I hope that you will get out of this. One of the things that you can think about is, how do I make sense of the data that I have? And so what does that mean? It means manipulating the data, and not necessarily in a bad way, but manipulating it in such a way that you can get it into the format that it needs to be in. Now, the data sets that I'm going to provide to you for this webinar will be what I consider to be clean, nice, and neat. So you are welcome for the gift that I will give you. And the reason why I say that it's a gift, because most often the data that you receive to perform data visualizations on or with will not be nice and neat. It will not be readily available for you to load it into a visualization tool. And so you will need to do some type of data mining, some type of analytics on it, maybe even manipulating it in the sense of getting it into the format that you would need it to be in for the tool that you use to recognize. So if you are comfortable in this space, I would consider you to be at the analytics or analyst stage in this process. And then lastly, the 4th stage that I've identified is the developer stage. Maybe you have some programming experience. Maybe you don't, but you're interested in learning how to program. What visualization, what programming languages are good for developing visualizations? So at this level, it is really the advanced stage of this process. And so the question is, where do you see yourself now? And so I'd like for you to think about that. And in terms of what I've just presented here, there are beginner, intermediate, and advanced stages. Again, this is the work that I'm doing. Others may have some other type of categories in which to place these stages, but this is what I envision in terms of a progressive learning path. The question is, where would you like to be in terms of building data visualization capacity? And as you move from becoming a learner to using different applications, to making sense of the data through visual analysis and analytics. And then if you're interested, you don't necessarily have to go through all of these stages, developing visualization tools and systems. That to me is the pinnacle of this process that I've outlined here today. So you can be at any stage, and it's fine to be at any of those stages. It just depends on where you are comfortable and where you would like to be. I'd also like to point out that I'd like for you to keep in mind that your first visualization that you create with whatever data that you have will not be your last visualization, and the first visualization tool that you use to create the visualization will not be your last visualization tool. So I'd like for you to increase or add these tools and these skill sets to your toolbox, but be mindful that there are many other applications out there. There are many different approaches to solving data visualization problems. And so just be mindful, your first visualization that you create, you are not done. There's always more that can be done. It will not be your first visualization. It won't be your last, and your first visualization tool will not be your last as well. Just keep that in mind. So we are here. We're at the beginning stage. This is day one, the introduction to data visualization. The webinar goals and objectives are to introduce participants to data visualization and the process of data visualization. We will achieve these goals by examining what data looks like. We will define data visualization. We will illustrate how data visualization can improve understanding of the history within the data, introduce the data visualization process, and explore different data visualization paths. So let's get started. So what is data visualization? That's something that I normally start out with any presentation about data visualization, because it's always interesting to see what people think or how they view data visualization. So how would you define data visualization if you were asked if someone said, so what is data viz? I get this a lot. Oftentimes when I'm at a conference that is not visualization related, I have to explain what data visualization is. So data visualization, as I like to define it, is a process, and it is a process of transforming raw, complex data into visual representations that do not overwhelm the viewer. Now, not every set of data that you get will be complex, but as we are moving or as existing in a data-driven world, many of the data that we receive or that we engage with, and for some of you, the research data that you create will be complex. And so there needs to be a process for transforming that data into a format that makes sense, not only to you, but to others who will be reviewing your work. So the principles of data visualization include providing foundational understanding of how we process visual information. Remember in the first slides, I talked about that first level of data literacy, information literacy. This is where those principles actually come into play here, and you utilize them whether you realize it or not. The outcomes are to have an informed opinion on how to communicate more clearly and powerfully using visualizations. We've all heard the saying, or if you haven't, you will now, that a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so in this age of big data and in this age of having to store this big data, we've kind of moved or advanced past that to say not only is a picture worth 1,000 words, but a picture is worth terabytes worth of space. You know, where are you going to save that data? Are you going to be able to manipulate the data as you need it, as you perform your experiments or run your algorithms? And so we have to think more broadly about what data is. The other outcome is to better analyze the visualizations that you come across, and that could be in the newspaper, if anyone reads the newspaper anymore, on the web, or in your daily experience. And so we interact with visualizations with data all the time, but perhaps we don't think about it in terms of how I'm presenting it here in this session. So what is the purpose of visualization? I love this slide. I always include it in all of my presentations. The purpose of visualization is insight, not pictures. Oftentimes, students and people who are new to data visualization think that if I create a pretty picture, then I'm done. You are not. Oftentimes, sometimes pretty pictures don't make sense. And so one of the things that we want to do, and what I want to share with you over the course of these few days, is to gain that insight, how to not only create the picture, but make a picture, generate a picture that makes sense, that answers the questions or question that you are trying to answer with that picture. Insight leads to several different things. And so it helps us to analyze data, to explain things, to tell a story, to make decisions, and to make discoveries as well. So in terms of discoveries, it allows us to spot differences. This is a simple example where you have two pictures that look similar. However, as you take a closer look with data visualization, we can point out these differences. So the reason why I'm showing you this particular slide in a very simple form, because as we move forward, things get a little bit more complicated. For example, if you're looking at numbers all the time, or your data is a bunch of numbers, it's hard to kind of pick out to spot those differences. For example, in this particular slide, how many 7s do you see? So I'm going to assume that you haven't looked at the slide deck yet. And so one of the things you can point out here is that when things are similar, they're very hard to pick out. And in this case, we're looking at numbers. The number 1 and the number 7 makes it even more difficult to try to differentiate between the two. In the previous slide, it was a picture as opposed to numbers that we're looking at here. So those things add to the complexity or the ability to be able to spot those differences. So visualization, and there are different things that you can do, not only just in terms of color, as I've shown here in this slide, but we could get into things like proximity of things and grouping things together, clusters. So there's a lot of things that could be done to help spot those differences. If any of you are familiar with or have heard of the Human Genome Project, perfect example of how data visualization helps to make sense of things or helps in decision making. It allows users to answer questions that frankly, they didn't know that they had. There's just so much data out there, not only in the Human Genome Project, but other projects as well, where data is just sitting there waiting to be examined and explored. And so having the knowledge and the skill sets, such as data visualization, to make sense of that data is great, and it helps to move not only your work forward, but science forward as well. So insight allows us, one of the things that it allows us to do is to help in the decision-making process. It also allows us to analyze data, to explain things, to tell a story about what actually that data represents. In this particular slide, I always share this with my class to show them that, hey, there is data visualization in the movies. If you went to see this movie, if you wait for the credits at the end, there is a section that says Data Visualization Scientist. I was blown away by it and encouraged my class to actually go and get brownie points if they went to see the movie and actually saw the credits at the end. So this is just an example of, again, the analysis of data and how insight, visualization provides insight for the data that you're looking at. If you have not seen this video that I posted here, I encourage you at some point to watch this video. It's very, very engaging. It's very interactive. It shows you how you can use data visualization to take a look at 200 countries, 2,000 years in 4 minutes. So that may be a typo with the 2,000 years. It's probably 200 years. It should be 200 years. But in 4 minutes, I do encourage you to take a look at it. Hans Rosling was considered by the Washington Post to be a visualization pioneer who made data dance. And so if you take a look at this video, you will understand the meaning of that, the title of that article. So I do encourage you to take a look at it. It's about 4 minutes. So there are 4 types of visualizations who a mentor of mine outlined at a conference that we attended: exploratory, confirmatory, presentation, and interactive. So be thinking about this as you start to create your own visualizations. What are you trying to convey? What do you hope to get out of the visualizations that you're creating? For exploratory, typically you have no hypotheses about the data, which means you just have some data. You want to take a look at it. You want to explore the data interactively as undirected searches. So sometimes I will get some data, or someone will say, hey, I have this data set. I don't know what to do with it. Can you take a look at it? And that's highly possible. You could also already know what you're looking for or what you're looking at, and you just want to have a way to confirm or to present that data, the outcomes, in such a way that it supports your hypotheses that you're working towards. So in this case, unlike the previous category, you have specific hypotheses about the data. Your efforts are goal-oriented, and you want to examine the hypotheses that you have. Sometimes you may just want to create a presentation, which means you have the facts. You want to present them in a visual and aesthetically pleasing way, but that is still informative. And so maybe your goal is simply to create a presentation, to select appropriate presentation techniques that will enable you to provide the insight that you have identified for your viewer. And lastly, there are interactive visualizations. So we've all seen them. If you've been on the web, you clicked on a visualization and something happens or something moves, or maybe you're able to set the measures or set the variables to certain values and see what happens as a result of that. And so if you think about the slide that I showed earlier in terms of where are you in this continuum of data visualization capacity, the interactive visualizations would be at the top of, or closely to the top of that little pyramid that I showed you, because that requires some programming if you want to be able to create your own. So when we look at Tableau tomorrow, you will see that one of the things that Tableau allows you to do is it creates those interactive visualizations for you. So if you're okay with the tool creating it for you, and you may not want to know how it works behind the scenes, perfectly fine. Tableau enables you to do that. If you want to dive a little bit deeper and you want to create your own interactive types of visualizations, then I'll have some recommendations on some tools that I will suggest that you learn how to use or become familiar with that will give you that opportunity to engage more, have more control over the interactive visualization parts of the outcomes that you have. Did you know that there are multiple stages of visualizing data? Usually, students will say, you know, if I create a pie chart or a bar chart and I can understand it, then I'm done. Depends on what your outcome is or what your goals are. But for this webinar series, and hopefully to engage you in going a little bit further than just creating the graphs, there are multiple stages of visualizing data. So we are going to cover the introduction to data visualization. I want you to keep in mind that there are different types of visualizations and different disciplines and different domains in which data visualization is used. And for each of those domains, the data looks slightly different. So the process that I'm about to share with you now, keep in mind, this is like a general idea of these stages. These stages may differ. You may find multiple stages that have more than the number of stages that I'm going to share with you momentarily, or they may have fewer. But regardless of how many stages that you encounter, they pretty much incorporate all of the stages that I'm about to share with you right now. The first stage is the acquire stage. So I have adopted the 7 stages presented by Ben Fry in the book that is cited here on the bottom of this slide, sorry. And if you take a look at this book, it gives you an introduction to data visualization through the lens of these 7 stages. It shows you how these stages interact with each other. And what's really nice about this, it shows you how the output from one stage impacts the next stage or other stages that are further down into the data visualization process. So at the beginning of all things is data. You have to have some data. So the first stage is the acquire stage. So the acquire step involves obtaining data, and that may seem like a simple step, but if there are any graduate students with us today, you will find, and maybe even some faculty as well, sometimes finding data can be a challenge. And not only just finding any type of data, you want data that is reliable. And so that could be another webinar that we could talk about, but I just want to point out that in this stage, like many of the other steps, it can be either extremely complicated, which means that you're trying to glean some useful information from a large system, or it could be very simple, which could be as easy as reading a text file. And so again, the file that we're going to work with later in the hands-on section of today's session, it will be a simple, what I would consider to be a simple data file. So do not be spoiled by this, but like I said, accept it as the gift that it is so that you can get familiar with the process and hopefully become comfortable enough with the process so that we can actually do some things this week. At the bottom of this slide and each of the slides that are to follow, I've indicated in blue the stage where we are, and the yellowish shaded stages indicate those stages that are directly impacted by that stage that we're in, or maybe impacted by another stage further down into the process. I also want to point out that although I am presenting this in a linear fashion, the data visualization process is nonlinear. You can be in any of these stages at any given time. But in the interest of introducing this process and helping you to see how each of these stages interact and contribute to the entire process and the ultimate outcome that you will get, I'm presenting it in a linear fashion. But again, keep in mind, you can be in any of these stages at any given time of the data visualization process. So I'm providing a little example here. So as we walk through these slides, you can kind of get a feel for how you might apply the content in each one of these stages. So for example, if we acquired the data that's shown here, first name, last name, major, academic status, programming experience, and visualization experience, this would be the acquired stage for this process. After you have acquired the data, the next stage is to parse the data. I will say this is typically where students struggle a bit, especially if you do not have any programming experience. Again, you do not have to be a programmer in order to do data visualization. And for many of you who are happy just with learning a different tool and not wanting to know what's going on behind the scenes, this may not even be of interest to you, but I want you to be knowledgeable. So if you hear someone say, I am parsing data, or I need to parse data, this is a high-level overview of what that means. Again, this is another topic that entire computer science courses are written about. But for data visualization, just to give you an idea of what is meant by parsing this data. So you want to break it, you want to change the data into a format that tags each part of the data and its intended use. So it's a file first name. How long is the name allowed to be? Will you accept characters or just some type of symbols? Those types of things. And so at this stage, you really do look at, is it a string? Is it a float? Is it a character? Is it an integer? These things become very important. Even if you're not going to be a programmer, these are the characteristics of the data variables that you will need to know when you import that data or you get that data in a format that it needs to be in order to be recognized by Tableau, or in even some cases, Excel, Microsoft Excel, if you work with that as well. If you've ever imported data, you have to take a look and make sure that it is recognizing the data in the format that it is intended. So the next example, you can see we have our variables, first name, last name, status, programming experience, visualization experience. And so the representation of the data varies depending on the type of data that we're collecting. And this, again, is just a simple example. After you have parsed the data, the next step is to filter it. Sometimes you will begin with a large data set, and you may not need everything at one time. And so what you would want to do is to be able to filter out and just keep that part that you're interested in. And as you could see, as we're moving along at the bottom of the slide into these different stages impact or have impacts on the next few stages or steps in the process as well. So you can see at the filter stage, it is impacted by the parse stage, which is the previous step that we've just gone over, but it's also impacted by the represent stage, which we haven't gotten there yet. But just to let you know, every stage could potentially impact every other stage in this visualization process. So the output from the filter stage is fed directly into the mine stage. So this step involves math, statistics, data mining, data wrangling. This may be some things that you've heard, some terms you've heard before. And again, there's a lot of literature courses that are dedicated specifically to data mining. And so all of these are components of the data visualization process. The data in this case receives only a simple treatment for the data set that we've been looking at for the example that I'm providing. But most of the time, this step can be far more complicated than a pair of simple operations. And so it really depends on the type of data that you have, the questions that you're trying to answer, and the outcomes and how you would like to represent the outcomes from that. Again, we're looking at, in this case, information visualization type data. When we look at scientific data, this process will look slightly different. There will be perhaps different techniques and tools that will be used, but the idea is pretty much the same, which means that you will go through this process of acquiring the data, filtering the data, parsing it to see what it looks like, and then trying to see what patterns do you see in that data and how to represent it. Which brings us to our next stage, which is the represent stage. So if you think about it, up until now, we've been talking about manipulating the data, looking at the data, what does it look like? It is finally in the represent stage that you actually see a visual representation of the data. And so it's at this stage that you want to think about, how do I represent this data? Do I represent it in terms of a graph for data that is information visualization related, or If you're looking at scientific data, you will be dealing with different types of renderings, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the coming days. But this step determines the basic form that a set of data will take. Will it be a list? And the reason why I put a list there, although we're talking about data visualization, sometimes it is more helpful to just provide a list. So I don't want you to just create a visualization for the sake of creating a visualization. If you create the visualization and it turns out to be very complex and it's hard to understand, if it makes more sense to create a list or a table, then create a list or a table. What I'm hoping to do is to give you different options, different ways that you can represent the data, but you should always be mindful of what is the purpose of data visualization. I'm pausing for effect here. Insight. In a word, insight. So if the data visualizations that you create do not provide insight, then you need to rethink that visualization and really rethink about, do I need a visualization to represent this data? So how you choose to represent the data can influence the very first step. And as you can see here, as shown in the schematic at the bottom of this slide, the represent stage impacts what you filter out, and it can also impact the data that you acquire. So the represent stage is considered a linchpin that informs the single most important decision in the visualization project, and it can make you rethink earlier stages. So if you may recall, as I mentioned before, that your first visualization will not be your last. And it is actually at this stage where you start to represent that data, where you learn or figure out, maybe I need to clarify something. Maybe I don't have enough data. Maybe it's not as clear as I would like it to be. Or in some cases, maybe I've answered a different question. So these are all things that you have to think about, or you should think about, as you are creating the visualizations. As you can see, the output from the represent stage goes directly into what's called the refine stage. So the refine stage, as its name implies, is where this iterative nature of the data visualization comes to the forefront here. So in the refine stage, hopefully you have shared your visualizations from the previous stage with someone that can give you some feedback. And I do encourage you to have someone that can and will critique your work. Sometimes we work so closely with visualizations that we know what we want it to say and what we want it to look like. And sometimes we can overlook those little things, those little details that will help to make it be more insightful. So always have someone to critique your work or give you some feedback. And as I mentioned before, different attributes, changing something in this refined stage. Maybe you've chosen a color that is not very well received. Maybe you want a different color or some other attributes, excuse me, to make the visualization more readable. It is in this stage where that happens. Lastly, we have the interact stage, which is where you allow the user to have a little control over the exploration of the data. So it could be any number of things, and I'm sure many of you have seen some of these things on the web. Interaction may cover things like selecting a subset of the data, changing the viewpoint, clicking on something and something else happens as a result of you clicking on something. So think about at this stage, this is also a stage where that iterative nature of the data visualization process comes into play as well. And as you can see, as indicated on the slide, the interactions that you make informs or may require you to refine the visualization a little bit, or it may require you to mine the data, which means you may identify some different patterns, or you want to showcase some different patterns. And so the interact stage will allow you to do that. The interact stage is not necessarily mandatory, but it is a stage where if you want the user to be more engaged in the process, then that would be a stage where you would try to think about ways in which you can give a little bit more control to the user for the purpose of exploring the data on their own. So here is an example of a visualization, interactive. If you have not looked at this, I do encourage you to do so now if you are at your computer. I'm not sure if I stop this, what will happen, but I'm going to assume that you have the opportunity to take a look at this. This is in real time, by the way. Not what you're looking at here. As you can see, this snapshot was taken June 28, 2017. But each time you visit this website, it gives you a real-time update of the wind across the United States. And so it's very interesting to see. And I suspect if I looked now, we would see some wind gusts with thunderstorms that are going on here. But this is a nice example of an interactive visualization where you could see and do different things here. And so the visualizations that I'm going to share with you and the resources I'm going to share with you, be thinking about not only, how are the visualizations created, but think about your own data and how might you use the techniques that are displayed in these visualizations with your own data. That could give you a different way of looking at and exploring your data. So think of this as a week-long resource for you to think about different ways to engage with your own data. So again, if you have an opportunity, if you haven't already done so, I do encourage you to take a look at this wind map. It is very interesting, and it shows a lot of different data at one time, and it's a perfect example of an interactive visualization where the user doesn't have to do much, but just open up the web link. This is another one, a day in the life of Americans. And so if you visit this link in the slides, it should be hyperlinked. If it isn't, if you Google the title here, A Day in the Life of Americans, you will see this. And it is interactive as well. And it's also kind of interesting to see how the dots, which represent different data points, move from one category to the next. And it kind of makes you think about your own life in terms of these different things that are going on. So again, these are just some examples here that I encourage you to take a look at your leisure. So what do we know? I presented the data visualization process in a series of 7 stages. Again, I want to reiterate, this is the framework that I have chosen to use. I use in my courses mainly because it is an easy way to introduce each of the 7 stages. However, I'm sure you will find other frameworks that can be used as well. But this is good to give you a feel for the different stages, to see how the stages impact each other. And so my whole purpose of showing you this is so that in the event that you become very knowledgeable of a visualization tool that you like, whether that's MATLAB or whether that's Tableau or ParaView, what happens when the functionality doesn't work? What I wish for you is to know where you are in that process when you no longer have that functionality, so that you are not lost. So you have some idea of what the next step should be, or what the previous step was, that you can work backwards to reverse engineer that process to figure out where you are. So what do we know now? We know that there are several stages of visualizing data. We know that output from one stage serves as input to the next stage. It is an iterative process. Remember, first visualization will not be your last, and that represent and refine stage are indicators of this iterative process. So start early. That's the one thing that I will share with you. If you are creating visualizations, or you need a visualization for a presentation or for a paper or whatever, start early. Remember, it is an iterative process. And so you want to allow yourself enough time to be able to walk through those stages. And again, as I said, your first visualization will not be your last visualization. If there's the one thing, the second thing that you take away from this series, the first is the purpose of visualization is insight. And then the second is your first visualization will not be your last visualization. So you may be asking, why should you care? So the fact that you are here watching or listening to this webinar says to me that you do care. And so we're going to talk about why should we all care about data visualization, and why is it important that we have at least some basic skill sets in terms of data visualization, because data is growing at a rate that it is outpacing the number of people who have the skill sets in order to make sense of the data, who are not intimidated by the data, by its size. And so there is a demand. Demand continues to grow as technology continues to evolve, and as we have these different things available to us to examine, and data in different formats. We need, just as ordinary citizens, to have some level of data visualization understanding. So you don't necessarily, everyone shouldn't necessarily have to be a data visualization scientist, but we have so much data that we're looking at, we're bombarded with daily. It is becoming imperative that everyone has at least some basic skill sets to understand the visualizations that they see. And as you can see, this graph goes from 2010 up to 2025. And I'm almost certain that by the time 2025 gets here, it will be even greater in terms of the amount of data that we're generating individually, but in our daily practice, but also in the research that we do as well. The ubiquitous nature of data. So that was part of the title for, or one of the topics that we wanted to cover today. As I've been saying in the previous slides, data is everywhere. You may not think about it in this term or in this way, but we engage with data all the time. And in fact, this slide is probably dated now, just to show you how data is evolving. It is the exponential growth in availability of data, both structured and unstructured. You know, we engage with data all the time, every day. We are data generators, and we are people who make sense of the data. And so I encourage you to think about moving beyond being a data user and data generator, but becoming someone that is what I like to call an agent of insight, someone with the skill sets to be able to transform complex data into insight in a visual way. Again, just to reiterate what I've said, I thought that this was an interesting title. Data here, data there, data everywhere. And again, it is. It's like we're at the tip of the iceberg. And when you get a moment, I encourage you also to take a look at this web link, which talks a little bit more about data and the challenges that we're facing with big data. This slide basically sums it up. And so there are, I think, more areas that this has maybe been explored, but I think the four that we see here, big data in terms of volume, when you look at the scale of the data, the different varieties of different types of data, forms of data, when you think about the velocity of data, everything is streaming online a lot, potentially, which has become useful in the current situation that we're in with the pandemic, but also the veracity of data, the uncertainty of it. And so on the web page, and I encourage you to take a look at that, and I believe it's on page 1, day 1, it talks about, there's a link, how not to lie with data. So that's very important. So one of the things we're talking about today, with the whole purpose of this, the webinar series, is to talk about how to visualize your data. But you also need to be cognizant of the fact that there is uncertainty. And how do you deal with that? There is an entire field of study that is dedicated to the uncertainty of data. So my job for you today is to, or over the course of these days, is to make you aware of the different elements and components of data visualization. So creating the visualization is definitely important, and making sure that there is insight gained is equally important, but also what's equally important is making sure that the certainty of your data or the certainty of the visualization that you generate are actually what you intended. And so again, this is just to make you aware of the different aspects and components of visualizing data. So from traffic patterns to music downloads to the web, histories, medical records, all different types of data exist. Well, some of us have Fitbits. We have data that our phone collects data. There are tracking systems. You can map your walks that you take. So data, when you go and you purchase things at the store, that's data. So data is literally everywhere. We cannot escape it. And so I think this slide really captures what I've been saying for the last few slides, is that you think about these different things: transferring data, sharing data, storage of data, researching data, searching data. It is inescapable. And again, I will encourage you to take a look at the links that are provided here. So what does this all mean? I've talked about different types of data. If you think about it, all of these things, or data visualization, is a connector. One of the things I like to say, that having the skill sets in data visualization gives you flexibility, because as seen on this slide, this person puts a big question mark at the intersection of these things: computer science, machine learning, math and statistics, traditional software, traditional research, and subject matter and knowledge and expertise. What is the one thing that is a common thread, or that can be used as a common thread, to connect all of these things? And in my mind, it's data visualization. So regardless of what your research is, regardless of what your major is, if you're a student, regardless of the projects that you're working on, at some point you will visualize data. Now, to what extent you will visualize that data, that's something that you will determine, but it speaks to everyone should have some level of data visualization knowledge and experience, so that you can, to the best of your ability and the most effectively, make sense of that data, not only for you, but for others who will be viewing your data and your results. So there are different visualization applications, no matter what area that you're in, there is some type of visualization group or area that focuses on that types of data. So you may recall at the beginning of this session, I talked about there being different disciplines, different areas. And so if you're looking at the data, dictates the type of tool that you will use. So if you're looking at biological data, then it's often grouped with computer animation. And in fact, it is often seen in gaming. So if anyone is interested in gaming,
Hi all, just wanted to let you all know that Vitria messaged that she just lost power at her end. As she was mentioning, she was under tornado watch. So let's give her some more time. We're trying a few things here. So Vitra is going to try dialing in. And if that doesn't work, I can get her on the phone and put it on the speaker mode, and I will advance the slides. We are figuring it out. So thank you for your patience, everyone, and sorry for this.
Thank you.
Yeah, and like Brent just mentioned, he was checking weather and he mentioned that there are bad storm cells around Vitria, where she is. I think we have Vitri on the line. She is dialing in, and there she is in the line.
Vitria Bird is now joining.
Welcome back, Vitria.
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Excellent. You guys can have
Okay.
I'm hearing an echo here, but I'm going to try to pick up where I left off. So I think I was on the slide where it says BioViz or biovisualization. And so that's an example of one of the different types of applications for which data visualization is used. If you advance to the next slide that says information visualization, that is pretty much a catch-all for different types of visualization if there's no like category for it. So specifically for scientific visualization, if you were to Google visualization, chances are scientific visualization would come up at the top of that list of results. But you have interdisciplinary type data where you're looking at maybe social media data or quantitative data of some sorts that is not related to scientific visualization. Any type of study of visual representation of large-scale collections of non-numerical information typically falls under the heading of information visualization. Of course, if you advance to the next slide, we look at geovisualization. So we have GPS systems in our cars, in our phones, watches, and so that type of data would fall under the category of geographic or geoviz. So in our quest for insight, if you advance to the next slide, what I want you to remember is that, advance to the next slide, the purpose of visualization, again, is not pictures, it is insight. And so how do we go from data to insight? If you advance to the next slide, you'll see a graph of a chart which shows you data and relevance on the x-axis and the relationship of different components of this process on the y-axis. And so at the very bottom of this, once you get the data, remember we talked about data literacy, information literacy. Once you have the data, you want to look at the relationships that exist within that data. So what type of information are you looking at? And so you want to, the questions that you want to ask and answer would be the who, what, where, and when. And we're all familiar with those. If you think about answering those questions about that data, that gives you a very strong foundation for going forward. The next thing you want to look at, if you advance to the next slide, is the patterns. So what do those patterns tell you? They tell you or help you to identify the knowledge that is pertained in that data. For example, knowledge is information aggregated to a point where it has meaning and purpose. And so in a word or in 2 words, the how. So in the previous step, you were answering those questions, the who, what, where, and when. When you move up to that knowledge stage, you're answering the question of how. How does that information come together for you to get that meaning that you're trying to get out of it? If you advance to the next slide, which moves us up from knowledge to understanding. So at this point, prior to this stage, we're all about making sure that we get the data, making sure that we can answer those previous questions. But at this stage, as we're moving towards getting that insight that we're working towards, understanding is cognitive and analytical. So it is the process by which one can synthesize new knowledge from what is already known. And then lastly, as we move up to the final stage of this process of going beyond data to true insight, if you advance to the next slide, it is wisdom. Wisdom builds on our past to give us new understanding, and by incorporating values, judgment, and experience, the ability to predict. And so that is in the essence of what data visualization will allow you to do, is to make predictions, to make decisions. And if you think about one of the previous slides that I showed earlier, the purpose of visualization is insight, and insight allows us to make decisions. And so I hope that you will view this chart and think about it as you go about the process of creating your own visualizations, and think about, are you answering these questions, or what do you need to do to enable you to gain insight from your own data? If you advance to the next slide, so you're only limited by your imagination. So what do you want to do? What do you want to learn? What do you want to find out? If you start with those questions and continue to be inquisitive about this process and be motivated, you will find that, you know, discoveries are made in pursuit of other things. And a lot of times that's what happens with data visualization. So at this point, if you advance to the next slide, it says hands-on exercise. So this is truly going to be interesting as to how we're able to do this. But there's a hands-on exercise that I have pulled together for you guys because you've been listening to me talk, and hopefully you're ready to get started. You want to actually get your hands on and actually look at some data. So if you take a look at if you go to the next slide, it says data exploration and analysis. The purpose of this hands-on exercise is to provide you with some experience exploring and analyzing data without using information visualization systems. So yes, that means this data set is small enough for you to manually explore it. And so the data set and the exercise description is provided on the webinar webpage. So if you go to day one, if you go to the webpage and look for day one, you could either scroll down the webpage, or if you look in the upper right corner of the webpage, you should see a menu. And if you click on that link, it will show you the list of other pages that are connected there. And so if you click on day one, and there should be, I'm going to try to pull it up here as well so I can see what you're seeing. Luckily, I have it installed on my local computer here, so I don't need the network. Hold on. But if you, once you find that link, and hopefully you were able to locate it, there is a link that says something in the effect of the description. So at the bottom of that page, I haven't pulled it up yet. You should be able to find it. So it should be a PDF file, the project description, and then you should see a small data set file. So I know that most of you, some of you may be working with different platforms, and so I attempted to save the file in Excel format and in CSV. So there's a link that says exercise. If you click on it, it will open up, it should open up into the PDF file. And you should see it's a one-page thing. Very easy if you could take a look at it. One of the challenges with doing a workshop is finding a data set that is small enough that will give you the opportunity to do the exercise, but then also interesting enough. And so everyone is familiar with, I hope, cereal, so morning cereals. And so this data set is a small data set of different types of cereal. And so what I'd like for you to do is to open it up and take a look at it, see what's in there. If you download the CSV file, that's the delimited file. But if you download the Excel file, it's the exact same data, although I do have some Excel formulas that I have included in there so that you could work through the process if you choose to use Excel. I know some of you may not. But even if you don't use Excel, like I said, this data set is small enough so that you could work through it by hand. And so what I'm going to do, I was going to share my screen, but I will have to walk you through it or talk you through it. What you should see, I'm going to assume that you have opened up the file, you've located it, you've downloaded whichever version that you're working with, and you're able to view its contents. And so there are multiple columns there. And so what I'd like for you to do is just take a moment to look in the file and see what you have. So in column A, it should be cereal. Column B, it should be manufacturer. The column C should be type, all the way over to cups. And so there's different types of data in this file. And so what I'd like for you to do, like I said, is just to explore it and to think about, what kind of questions might you ask? I haven't asked you any questions to answer yet, but just looking at this data, find your favorite cereal if you have one. If you don't have one, find one that you're aware of, and just kind of take a look and see what the data looks like in that. So I'm going to give you about a minute. Hopefully you've been looking through it as I've been talking, but just give you another minute to kind of look through it, and then we will start to do some things here. I'm going to encourage you to download both sets or both files. Like I said, it's the same data, but the Excel file contains the Excel functions that will allow you to gather some information about the data. For example, I can't see you, but how many manufacturers do you have? based on the data that you see. So now one thing about data visualization is that it allows you to do repetitive things. So with this small data set, it will be very easy for you to manually count. But just imagine if you have a huge data set, that it would be counterproductive for you to manually explore. But in this case, you can look and tell me and think about how many manufacturers or how many different types of cereal do you have? So that's our first question. How many different types of cereal exist in the data set? So hopefully you said 77. And that could have been easily determined just by looking at the column A content and the number. If you're in Excel, this tells you how many is there minus the column heading. So now what I want you to do is to tell me or to think about as you're working through this. Again, if I was able to do this interactively to show you, I would be demonstrating it. But how many, what I'd like you to do, tell me for each manufacturer, how many cereals are listed in this data set. So again, the manufacturer was indicated by one letter in column B. And so you can go through and count how many there are for each one, or if you have the Excel version of this file, I have actually entered in the formula that you would need. If you're not familiar with it, it's the count if formula. So if you're familiar with functions in Excel, you would hit the equal sign and then the command, the function count if, COUNTIF, open parentheses, and then you need to put the range of cells for that column. And so in this case, it's column B. So we would do B2 colon B2 or B78, which is the last row for that data, comma, and then in quotation marks, you put in the manufacturer's code or the letter that represents the different manufacturers. And so in this case, you would list or enter the letter Q for the manufacturer that has that one, which I think is Quaker Oats. And then the next one for Post, you would use the same function, but you would substitute Q for whichever letter represents that manufacturer. So what I'd like for you to do, just by looking at this, like I said, either you can count it or you can use a function. We're just getting some basic information about this data set. And so what we're going to do, what I'm going to encourage you to do, is to calculate or to count up how many manufacturers there are, how many cereals there are. For the calories, tell me what's the maximum calorie count and what's the minimum. So these are some basic things. And if you think about those 7 stages that I shared with you, and it's also in the slides, this would be in this mining stage. So you are actually mining this data. You're looking at it to see what's in there. I didn't give you a question to solve, but you are exploring this data set. So what I'm going to leave you with, because what we were going to do was for you to explore the data set, to find some insights that you would like to share with me tomorrow. Hopefully, we will not have technical issues, but your assignment for today is to take a look at this data set, find some insights. There are some interesting things about this data set, and so take a look at it and see if you can find any. For example, the cups column. What's interesting about that? What's interesting about those values that are in there? And so I'm going to leave that for you to take a look at, and you should be able to see something that stands out more so than other things. But what I'd like for you to do is to explore this data set, try to create some a visualization, identify your favorite cereal, and then figure out a creative but visual way to share that data. And so if you are willing and open to sharing your visualizations, then we can take a look on tomorrow, because at this point, there's very little that I can do in terms of being able to assist you with this part going forward. Luckily, like I said, this is a small enough data set that you can play around with. So if you will take a look at the slides again, I have towards, I think, the second to the last slide, where it says what's next. So what I'd like for you to do between now and tomorrow is to explore the website, the webinar website, check out the resources page. I will be updating this web page regularly throughout this series of days. If you have any questions, in particular, because I don't have the visual to be able to see you or to see my screen, I have created a web link where you can post your questions. And as soon as I get internet access again, I will take a look at if you posted any questions, and I will create a web link called Frequently Asked Questions. So you can post your questions anonymously, and I will answer them as well. So do take a look at the website. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to let us know. For tomorrow, we are going to hopefully take that same data set that you're working with, and we're going to see, can we get it into Tableau? And so if you haven't already downloaded Tableau and started your 14-day trial, I do encourage you to do that. I also have some training modules for Tableau that you'll be able to work through at your leisure. Again, there are way too many of them for you to attempt to do them this entire week. And so they will be available to you as you go forward. Some of them may be of interest to you, some of them may not. But the way that this is set up is that you can pick and choose which ones that you think is the most useful at a given time. So you may come back at a later time and want to take a look at it. The links will be provided, will include transcripts and short movies or videos for you to watch. And when I say short, typically about 7 to 10 minutes, so that you can, and it walks you through the process of visualizing that data using Tableau. And so that's what I have for you today. Due to the technical issues, this is I'm limited to what I can show you on my end, but I do hope that you are able to download the slides and that you do take a look at the hands-on exercise that I provided. And I look forward to hearing and seeing your solutions if you're open to sharing them on tomorrow. And so Ritu and Brent, I will hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Vitria, and thank you, Brent, for driving the slides. It went very well, Vitria, and given power, despite the power disruption, I mean, we were able to follow everything. Thank you. So what we are going to do is we are going to open the slide, the CSV file or the Excel sheet in Google Sheets, and what Brent and I can do is demonstrate how to apply the formula and do the max, min, and other things you were mentioning.
Okay, excellent.
So Brent, let's open the slide, the CSV file. Let's go back to the Excel sheet. And let's go to open with, like in top. And let's say open with Google Sheets, right? And now what Vitria was mentioning is, let's say if we want to find the maximum calorie for this column number D, then we would want to skip the heading of the column, let's say calories, and we want to select from row number 2 for this column up till the last row. And we click on the sum sign or the last formula sign, this one, and we can see the max value. So we can print sum of all the calories of, but the exercise, let's say if it calls for max, Brent, we can just select the max formula and it will print the maximum calorie in this column. So you want to select again. Very good. Now go to top. Yeah. Right. Now we go there, say max. And now enter. It's 110. Was that the answer you were expecting, Vitria?
Hold on. Let's
For
see here.
maximum calorie.
I have 160 actually.
Okay.
The issue is that when you are selecting the cells, you actually copy the cells down. If you see all the D column is now 110.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That was excellent. So we have wonderful audience. Thank you. Okay, it's 160 now.
Mhm.
Would you want us to do some other exercise, Vitria?
So what I'd like for them to do is, for each manufacturer, tell me how many cereals are listed. So if you look at the column that says manufacturer and cereal count, if you're looking at the Excel spreadsheet, so
Yeah.
I've listed the manufacturers by letter. So for each one of them, how many cereals are listed in the data set that is produced by that manufacturer?
Great. So there are multiple ways to skin the cat here. One quick and easy way would be to select from row number 2 till row number 23 and do a sum. No, actually no.
So one way to do it is with the count if function. And so you would still look at all of the variables in column B, but you would tell it to look for a particular letter. And so that should be the formula for that one is in cell R3.
Where?
I did the first one. So for Quaker Oats, I have a count of 8. And so that's using that formula.
So Brent, what you could also do is select from here, from row 2, and go till row number 23, and then go to formula, and click on count. So it may change the number here. Let's undo that. Maybe we can click on equal to sign at the bottom. Maybe we can say like somewhere equal to, and then row number. Yeah, let's try that. Go to count, yeah. Maybe equal to sign got deleted. So if you can redo the thing, you were doing the right thing.
And so I will say, as we're doing this may appear to be, and it is oftentimes tedious, but this is a part of the data visualization process. Is figuring out what formulas that you need and figuring out how to calculate different things. So this is, I don't want you to think, oh no, this is silly. It is a very important aspect of the process. And just so you know, 80 to 90% of the data visualization process is actually cleaning the data and getting it into a format that it needs to be in. Because what you will find once we get into Tableau makes it super easy for you. And so the whole purpose of, you may be asking, well, why are we doing this now? Is to hopefully give you an appreciation for the process and also to help you to see what goes on behind the scenes. So again, for example, if you load your data into Tableau and it interprets it one way, but it should look different. Having had this experience of actually wrangling this data, this small data set, hopefully it will give you the confidence to say, okay, and this is not correct, and what do I need to do in order to make it make sense. And so if you work through putting in, calculating the serial counts, you should be able to sum all of the serial counts after you calculated them or put in the formula, and it should be the exact number of serials in the data set. So this is like a sanity check. So if your total, after you put in the functions, is not the total number of serials, which we said was 77, then there's a miscalculation somewhere.
So Vitra, could you repeat the formula that the people that we should be using here?
Yes, so it's for Excel, you start the function with the equal sign. So you say equals, and then the word count, C-O-U-N-T, if, I-F, all together one word. So C-O-U-N-T-I-F, open parentheses, and then since we're looking for manufacturers, we're going to put in column B, so you put the letter B, and then the number 2, because that's the start of where the data begins in that column. We want it to go all the way down to the last value in that column, which is row 78. So we would say top colon B78. Then you're going to put a comma after 78, and then you're going to do quotation marks. So the first quotation mark, followed by whichever manufacturer's letter that you're looking for. So if you're looking for Quaker Oats, which is represented by a Q, you would put the Q in quotation marks, and then you would close the function. So this is the entire, I'm going to read the entire function as to what you should have. If you're looking for example, the Quaker Oats, how many Quaker Oats cereals we have. So your function should be the equal sign, the word count, if, C-O-U-N-T-I-F, all together, open parentheses, the letter B as in boy, the number 2, colon, the letter B as in boy, the letter 7, the number 7, the number 8, comma, open quotation mark. In this case, I'm looking for Quaker Oats, so I'm going to put the letter Q. But as you go forward, as you're looking for the others, you will replace the Q with P or G or whatever the letter is for the other manufacturers. So you would have open quotation marks, the letter Q, close quotation mark, and then you would close the parentheses. And that should be your entire function.
That's excellent. Thank you. And I think Brent already did that.
Okay. So how many? So if you're looking at the Excel file, I had already put the function to sum up that total, that serial count column. So that number should equal the number of serials in the data set. If that's different, then you'll need to check your functions for each one of those. Now, if you try to do a shortcut to just copy and paste from the first one and copy it down into the other cells, you want to check and make sure that the range of cells did not change. If you have a different value, then chances are, as you pasted it, Excel is so smart, it tried to help you out. And so it kind of figured you wanted to start with the next cell, but you want to keep those values the same. And so if that number, your total number is different from 77, which is what it should be, then what we would need to do is to take a look at the functions.
Great. And we have typed this function that you would use to find the maximum number of cereals offered by manufacturer with code Q in the chat window, in case that helps. All right. Are there any other questions from the audience? And Vitria, do you want us to do any other exercise?
No, I just want you to explore the data set, see what insights, so in the description, it says to make note of any assumptions that you're making. And we're going to revisit this tomorrow with Tableau. So I want you to take a look and see, did you notice anything strange about the data set? Is there anything that doesn't make sense? anything that pops out to you, just try to think about what this data looks like and any questions that you might have about the data.
So this was excellent.
And if they're comfortable enough to actually create some visualizations, then I encourage you to go ahead and do that as well. So Excel will allow you to create some visualizations. You don't have to use Excel. Like I said, this data set is small enough. You could even draw some visualizations out by hand. So either way, in my case, I would have to draw them out by hand because I don't have power here. But you can either try to answer, choose your favorite serial, and then create at least one visualization with the data represented here. Compare it to another serial.
Yeah, and we can also do like pie charts, like, I mean, in Excel, there's like charts there.
Yeah.
You can do that.
Mm-hmm. You could, look at calories versus fat, or calories versus sodium or sugar, those types of things. So there's lots of different ways that you can look at the data. And so I'll be interested in seeing what people come up with, or how what you choose to visualize using this data set.
So this worked great. So it's time for audience to ask questions. Do you all have any questions for us or for Vitria?
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Hi, Vitria. I have a question for you.
Okay.
Sure.
Yeah. So, like the iteration process which you showed for the step-by-step for this data visualization. So, I suppose that would be same for the unsupervised and the supervised data both.
So that's a good question. So also the answer is yes, but keep in mind that you can be in any of those stages at any given time. So what I presented was a linear fashion, which says that you start at the acquire stage and then you move on to parse and whatever. You could start at any point in that process, but what you need to be aware of is that what your next step might be once you complete that particular stage. So if I give you, like I've given you this data set, so you didn't have to acquire it. You're now in the data set, or at the stage of mining this data. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I got it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Bird, this is Brent. I logged a couple of questions from a couple of audience members. I believe Ritu answered one or two of them. So the first one is from Rachel. She asked earlier on, when you were talking about the 4 different types of data visualization, are there different design principles that exist for those different types?
Yes, so that's a very good question. So the design principles are not necessarily for the different types of visualization, but it's for the different types of data and the different types of layouts that you might want to use. For example, depending upon what you're trying to convey and how you want to convey it. And I think I have some information on the webpage. I'll double check now that I have this question. Depending upon what you're trying to show and what your data looks like, then those different design principles will come into play. So what I'm going to do, because I think it'd be better if I could show you some examples. I'm making a note now. And so Brent, if you could also, in addition to sharing the questions with me verbally, if you could send me those questions also, I can make sure that I post this content to the webpage.
Oh, absolutely.
That was a very good question, Rachel. Thank you for asking it.
Yeah. And then Priyanka, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but Priyanka asks, are the 7 stages of visualization the same for both the supervised and unsupervised data sets?
So they may differ a little bit because of the data itself. So remember, the data dictates the tools, but the approach or the stages in some form will still be there. So it really depends on the type of data that you have, which is going to dictate the approach that you use. But the idea is that you understand what happens in each of these stages, so that as you are working with your data, whether it's supervised or unsupervised, you will be aware of the different stages that go into the visualization process.
Okay. And then the last question I have, it was another one from Rachel, and this is the one that I believe Ritu has already answered. Rachel asked if there was multiple off-the-shelf tools that you can use for parsing your data, depending upon the type of data you're working with.
So that's also a good question as well. I'm going to say yes. And what I'm going to do, I have in the resources page, if I haven't already put it there, I'm going to provide you guys with a list of tools, and I'm going to tell you it may be a bit overwhelming. I'm just going to give you everything that I have, and depending upon what your interest is. And so oh wow, the power just came back on. So for example, for parsing, I have a tool list for that, and for different types of visualization applications, many more than what we're going to cover for the website, for the webinar series here. So what I will do, I'm making a note as well to make sure that I provide that on the webinar webpage.
Okay, that's all the questions that I saw, or that I kept track of in the chat window. If anybody else has anything, we got a couple minutes left, I think.
Dr. Bird?
Yes.
I wanted to, I saw your presentation and you mentioned the data visualization process, and it has several stages. How do you find that differs with the data preparation process that is required independent of whether or not you're going to have a visualization at the end?
So I couldn't hear your question clearly, but this is what I think you said. You can correct me. You wanted to know if the data visualization process is required for the resulting output that you're going to get. Did I capture that?
Well, it was more about the data preparation process.
Okay.
Do you find that similar to the data preparation process, where you really have to do data sources and data preparation for coding? Is it different names for kind of the same process of data preparation from your opinion or your insight?
So from my perspective, I always encourage people to take that step to understand, to get a clear understanding of what the data represents, what it looks like, and things of that nature. You could definitely create data visualizations without going through that initial stage of, of course, you still have to acquire the data. But in most cases, usually what happens once you have the data, you just jump right into creating a visualization. What I have experienced with students is that at the end of class that I teach, they are very capable of utilizing the tool, because the tool, for example, Tableau, does a lot of this for you. However, when I start to ask them something about the data, that's where I learned, or I figured out, they really did not understand the data itself. So what I'm trying to do is to help the students, or help anyone who's interested in this process, not only become familiar with the tool, because you can learn how to use a tool at any time, even without me. You don't need me to learn how to use a tool. But the value that I bring, or the knowledge that I'm trying to bring, is that in addition to understanding the tool, I want you to understand the underlying data, because you may go work for a company that does not have the tool that you're familiar with. And then what happens? And so if you are able to continue to work, to continue to be productive, continue to make those insights, even in the absence of the tool that has enabled you to share those beautiful pictures, that gives you, makes you more marketable, and it makes you an asset to the project, to the team that you're working on. So yes, you could definitely create, I've seen it. I've seen people create visualizations using whatever tool that they choose, but they struggle and they have a challenge with when you ask those deeper questions about what does this data look like? What happens if I change this versus that? Or what impact does this variable have on the outcome that I'm presenting the visualization for? So I know that was a long-winded answer, but I am a proponent of understanding the data, whether that's quantitative data, qualitative data, whatever type of data. My goal is to help you to start thinking about at a deeper level of what that data looks like and how you can represent it in the absence of a tool, in addition to with the use of a tool.
Thank you very much. That's exactly what I wanted to understand. I really appreciate your answer. Thank you.
Okay.
And Dr. Bird, I have one more question that just popped in a couple minutes ago from Julian Williams. Julian asks, what's the big difference between data visualization and statistics?
Oh, so that is also a good question. You guys are really asking good questions. So the difference, so statistics, as you know, has been around forever, and so has visualization in a sense, just in different forms. Visualization allows you to represent statistical results in a visual way. So again, you may recall, as I stated earlier in the presentation, there may be times when you have a table and the table makes sense and there is no need to create a visualization to visually represent it. And in those instances, I do encourage you, if the insight is gained using the table, then you go with the table. Don't just create a visualization for the sake of creating it. The purpose of the difference between visualization and statistics is that statistics allows us, or it gives us the ability to mine that data or to get out of it or to get it in a format that we can create the visualization from. So remember, visualization is all about data. Without the data, there could be no visualization. Without the statistics, which is a part of the data visualization process, that mining stage, we would have nothing to actually show, particularly if you're looking for a particular outcome where you run some statistics, or you want to know the average of things, or you want to know the impact of one variable versus another variable. It's statistics that allows us to do that. Visualization allows us to visually represent it.
Okay, that's all the questions I see in the chat window. So I think we'll wrap it at that, if everybody's okay.
Okay, excellent questions, guys. If you have any more, please feel free to let us know.
It was great, guys.
Thanks, everybody. We look forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. For those of you who've signed up for tomorrow's session, please contact us if you have any issues or questions regarding installing the ParaView and Tableau tools. Have a good afternoon.
Okay,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.